Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Walker, Senior Vice President of Public Policy for the Overland Park Chamber of Commerce. Today, I'm joined by Melanie Haas, who is the Democratic candidate for the Kansas State Board of Education, District 2. This interview is co-hosted by the Northeast Johnson County Chamber, the Shawnee Chamber, and the Leawood Chamber, and is part of the series of forums and interviews being conducted on behalf of the Johnson County Public Policy Council. The Public Policy Council is comprised of the 10 chambers of commerce serving Johnson County, and we developed today's questions focusing on business and community issues. We'll start with a brief opening statement followed by our Q&A. At the conclusion of the interview, our candidate will have time to make a closing statement. And Melanie, thanks for joining us today. At this time, I'd like to ask you to start with your opening statement.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. This is really important to be able to get in front of people since we can't, knock doors this year and I can't be out shaking hands. So it's nice to see everybody here virtually. My name is Melanie Haas and I am a mom. So I came to run for this position because I have two kids, 11 and 13. I have two girls that are in Shawnee Mission schools. And this is going to be our fourth year in public school. And it's been a journey for all four of us, my husband Nathan included. And, the more I've gotten every year, it's been a learning experience. And every year we've seen the evolution of my kids' education. And I've had the opportunity to really get close to my own local district. And as I went through that process of getting more involved and being more active and meeting not just teachers, but building administrators and then administrators at the district level, it became an opportunity for me to ask, well, how can I do more? And when I looked for the person who currently held this seat and I wanted to know what was happening at the state level, I found that the person there really didn't represent me or my family, or frankly, any of the families that I knew. I felt like there was a disconnect, and I felt like someone who, sits in a position where they're intended to serve the constituents in their area, they should be doing just that. And that wasn't what I found. And so that's why I chose to run. My background is not politics. I never thought I'd be a politician, but I am instead a self-taught software engineer. And after running my own company for a long time, I then went the corporate route. And so I also became a leader in the corporate space. And I've worked for some of the really big organizations here in town. And then I've also had the opportunity to work for some really cool startups. And I feel like all of that tech background drove the conversation that I was having in my own district. And I want to be able to take that background also to the state level so that we have a little bit more diversity at that state board level. There are 10 people on that board, and a lot of them have a background in education. And I think it would be great to have somebody there who's a little bit business focused and a little bit tech focused. So that's why I'm here, and I just want to serve my community.
Well, great. I appreciate you giving us a little bit of your background. So why don't we dig right in with our questions, and I'll start with a general one. Is tell us, what are your top 3 policy issues?
Sure. So my number one issue is always going to be ensuring that we maintain adequate funding for Kansas public schools. Anyone who has looked at the history knows that goes way back, and there are a couple of lawsuits in between, and I won't bore anybody with details here in this forum, but adequate funding is absolutely my number one priority. My second priority right now especially is health and safety for teachers and for students as we work to continue educating kids remotely, but also as we return to classrooms. And so here we are, we're recording this right at the beginning of October. And, we're seeing a lot of change and flux in all of our different school districts. District 2, the seat that I'm running for, there are 5 different school districts in this district, and they are all doing something that's a little bit different. So, safety and the health of those teachers and students is my second priority. And then modernizing curriculum offerings. I talked about my tech background, and really, like I said, I came to this with a goal of being able to bring that tech expertise and weave it into the ongoing conversation about education and what's good for kids. And I really want to focus on making sure that as we look towards graduation, we are setting kids up for success in 21st century jobs.
Good. Well, thank you. And as you well know, the state board is implementing Kansans Can, which is a student-focused vision for education with aggressive goals for kindergarten readiness, high school graduation, and success and preparation for a workforce. What are your thoughts on the Kansans Can redesign that's currently going on?
Um, Based on everything that I've been able to learn about the project, and they've got a great website and there are lots of videos, and I've talked to people who have had some exposure with it. It's an awesome project. Uh, we come from, so my stepmom was a teacher, and I've been in this education space for a long time. And for the past, 2+ decades, I've seen that teachers are consistently, not just here in Kansas, but everywhere, they're being forced to teach to the test. And that means that they're being measured based on test scores. And then that's the measure of success for the entire school, is just how did kids do on a test. And so that puts students and teachers in kind of a one size fits all model that is the same everywhere. And I like the redesign project because it changes the priorities in a good way. And it puts social emotional learning as a priority. And it gives kids a chance to really take control of their own future and what their own personal path forward looks like. And so, for me, I like that there's an opportunity for kids to really focus on skills that they can relate to. And, for me, that would be tech skills, right? Real world learning is something that's really near and dear to my heart. And so it's not always easy for a high school student to be able to look 5 or 10 years down the road and say, I know that I want to go do this thing when I grow up. But by giving them real world learning opportunities, which is one of the foundational pieces of this program, that really sets them up for being able to see, oh, after graduation, this is an area that I have interest in. And then they can really kind of take a step back and look around that area and go, okay, what do jobs look like? What kind of education am I going to need after high school, if any? Is it a college path? Or, not every kid has to go to college. There are lots of other career paths that they can take for, you can learn a trade. Like I did, you can learn to be a software engineer, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to go to college. So I like everything about this program.
Good, good. And you touched on this earlier in your intro, but the COVID-19 pandemic has really forced Kansas schools to find new ways of serving our students. What do you think the big takeaway should be from this experience that we've gone through?
I think the big takeaway is that we're learning that we don't have all the time that we think we have. Again, one of the frustrations that I've kind of bumped into in my own district level is I see slow progress. And now with all of the changes that we've gone through because of COVID, we need to begin to recognize that we just don't know how much time there is. And we have to start taking action because our kids are growing up really fast, and we don't want them to fall behind. We don't want them to fall behind the plans that we're making for them. So back in March, our schools really didn't have a lot of warning when they very quickly had to shift. We basically left for spring break and didn't come back. And when we returned from spring break, it was virtual. And so all of a sudden they're trying to figure out, how do we get devices? In some districts, they didn't even have devices in hand already. My kids already had, an iPad and a laptop, but there were districts across the state that had to scramble and figure out how they were going to purchase devices and then how they were going to get them distributed. And then once they got all the kids back online, there were districts that had network issues and the VPNs were going down, and they were just working as fast as they could, but they were behind. And so it's a time issue. We need to be more creative as we move forward, and we need to be flexible. We've got to understand that, we can't strive for perfection because it's just not going to be there. I would borrow from software and take the idea of iteration. So we're going to go through a week, and in software land, we're going to build stuff for a week, and then we're going to take a step back and look at it and say, how did that work and what can we do better? And I think we can do exactly the same thing in schools. So I'd love to see us iterating, and I'd love to see more teamwork and creativity, and just accept that we're not going to be perfect, but that we need to move fast.
Thanks. And how control over education decision-making is divided among the legislature, the state board, and local school boards has been a matter of ongoing debate. What are your views on that issue?
I think local control is a really good thing. So I was born into a very small town in South Central Kansas. I attended kindergarten there, and then I grew up in Wichita Public Schools. And I can tell you that what works for those districts doesn't look anything like what works in Johnson County. There may be some overlap, But this is one of the reasons that I think that local control is a good thing, because there's a lot of diversity across the state of Kansas. And, if you look out west, it's even more rural and kids are spread out even farther. And the State Board of Education and the KSDE are essentially responsible for providing guidance in many cases, but they aren't necessarily setting the letter of the law. They're not being specific in rules, and they leave a lot of details up to those local districts. And I think that that benefits those districts. That's exactly what we saw when they rolled out their plan for what schooling was going to look like this fall. And I think that we need to keep that intact, because it's what allows those districts to be creative and flexible in the first place. And that's how they're going to be able to achieve and move forward.
And what do you think the biggest challenge is that's currently facing the State Board of Education?
I think the biggest change is exactly this conversation that we're having around how school has changed. It's the school, the thing that we've always thought of as school, is now completely different and always will be. There's not going to be a return to normal necessarily. There's just new. And so, all across our state and really worldwide, we've learned that sitting in a classroom isn't the thing that's required for learning. And remote instruction has been widely embraced, but teachers and administrators are now having to kind of take stock of that and again, just iterate and figure out, how are we doing and how can we modify this? What can we do better? So it's back to that iteration, but also just knowing that moving forward, technology is going to be a big piece of what holds, this new version of education together. So not only do we need to be ready to hand out laptops, and we need to have the infrastructure in place to be able to get all of those kids online, but my own personal background comes also from a place of user experience. So we need for administrators and the people making these tech decisions to be thinking through, what is this process going to look and feel like for a student? What's it going to look and feel like for a parent? What's it going to look and feel like for a teacher? And I think that, we're really going to have to be open-minded and creative again in thinking about what school is going to be like in the coming months and years. And at the same time, we have to continue to prepare, because we've been told by experts already that, once we get through this pandemic, there's the possibility that we will see new versions, different bird flus, the opportunity for a future pandemic is certainly something that we should be prepared for.
And this next question you've addressed quite a bit in your opening, but I want to give you a chance to expand on it if you'd like, is simply, why are you seeking public office?
Well, yeah, as I said, I really do want to be able to represent the people in my community. I want them to feel like they have a voice, and I really want to be accessible. I've heard a lot during this process from teachers, from parents, from other people who work inside the schools. I've heard from para-educators. I've been hosting Zoom meetings. I want them to feel like they should have a voice too. It's one thing to hop in your car and drive down to the local school board meeting, when we're not in a pandemic, and speak at public comment or be able to send emails to local people. It's a little bit different when you reach the state level, because the influx of email is more, the conversations are bigger, and you're not necessarily just going to hop in your car and drive over to Topeka, right? So I want to make sure that I'm here and available for the people of District 2. And then I want to make sure that we're setting policy that makes sense for Johnson County.
And my last question for you is, what do you think most distinguishes you from your opponent in this race?
Well, it's kind of an easy one, really. I mean, for one thing, I'm showing up. I'm here to listen to those teachers and parents that are stressed out and anxious about going back to school. But I've also been talking to not just the folks I just mentioned, but also, I'm fielding calls from reporters, and I'm doing these interviews. I'm showing up to forums. I sat down last week for a forum that was broadcast live, and my opponent's table was there empty because he didn't show up. He hasn't updated his Facebook page. He hasn't updated his website. So it's really hard for people to know what he stands for. But there's a challenge there, because, historically, the partisanship that comes into play, I think that there were assumptions that we could make. Democrats versus Republicans, we make a lot of assumptions about what people stand for. And this has just been a really different year. Also, even though we both have school-age kids, my kids are the ones that are enrolled in public schools and his aren't. I've got a lot of experience in the field of education. My very first job with a startup, my very first job writing code, I actually worked for a startup that was education focused for several years. I met a lot of teachers and I got to really understand the relationships between each other and their administrators and a lot of the challenges they faced. And so that was another thing that got me interested in education early and has always been a driving factor in my interest in the field. And really, I fully support our public schools, and I want all Kansans to have access to a world-class education.
Well, Melanie, I appreciate you taking the time to answer the questions today. And as promised, I want to give you a chance to make any closing thoughts and address any issues we didn't cover before we wrap it up.
Well, for me right now, the big focus is just, I want everybody to show up and vote. I don't know when this is going to go live exactly, but we're not that many days away from the cutoff for registration. And then I want to encourage everybody to just get their ballots in early, because that's going to make the whole process a lot smoother for the JOCO election office. And I appreciate that your questions were inclusive, and I feel like I've hit on most of my points. So thank you, and thank all of you for the work that you do.
Well, we're happy to do it, and certainly we want to encourage everybody to get out and vote. That wraps up our interview for today with Melanie Haas, who's the Democratic candidate for the Kansas State Board of Education, District 2. The interview has been recorded, and we will have it posted on our Public Policy Council website, which is www.votejoco.com. And let me remind everybody, advance voting by mail begins October 14th. In-person advance voting begins on October 19th. And of course, Election Day is on November 3rd. So thanks everybody for joining us, and have a great day.